One of the most basic difficulties for those who hold the view of the materialistic universe is the question of a beginning. And as you pointed out before, Christianity has long claimed that the universe was created, and now we have the Big Bang theory that suggests at least that it started at a certain time. And yet, then there's always the issue, yes, but if there can't be an uncaused cause, then what created God?
Yeah, sure.
And I guess Christianity perhaps gives different answers to that. As I understand it, Augustine's answer was that God is outside time. And in a way, that's a good answer, but it seems to me that that's a way of saying we don't know what the explanation is because none of us has the slightest idea of what it means to be outside time. Or Christianity says that the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are three, but they are one. And from those statements, many wonderful things follow. And yet, it seems to be a way of saying, we don't know what it is, because we have no idea of what it means to be three and to be one, and how a God as powerful and as amazing, let's say, as the God of Job, could appear in the form as a human being and be the Holy Spirit. So my point is this, and as I say, I think this may be a strength or a weakness, but it does seem as if many of the difficult questions are just explained by mysteries, which is a Christian word, that in a way are saying, we don't know. So I don't know that whether that's a challenge or a suggestion or a help, but
it's a wonderful challenge.
But I'd be interested in your response to it.
Yes, I love this particular thing, and I've had to think about it a great deal because, of course, it is absolutely obvious that replacing one mystery by another is not always a helpful way forward.
Sometimes it might be.
Yeah, well, if it's a more sensible mystery.
I love how John was really leaning in there, right? He was really excited to get into this. And it really is an age-old question. Like, if God created everything, then who created God? And this question really can sometimes trap people into thinking that God was just like any one of us, right? Like God is also a creature, a created creature within the time-space continuum, and that he's bound by laws of causality like all of us are. We all came from somewhere, right? And it's kind of, for the atheist, the classic gotcha question, like especially Richard Dawkins. Well, then who created God? And this is like saying, what caused the author of a book to be written into their own story? Well, authors exist outside their books. They don't need to be written into their books to exist. In the same manner, like God, he doesn't need to be caused. He is the uncaused first cause. And God is not part of the universe. He is the creator of the universe. He is the author of the universe. And this is just like the Bible teaches that God is eternal. He is uncreated. He is the uncaused cause. And the idea of who created God, in a sense, misunderstands the very nature of who God is. You see in Exodus 3:14, it says, God says to Moses, I am who I am. God exists outside of space and time and causality. Just like what Psalms 92 says, before the mountains were born, or you brought me forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And Jesus reveals God's eternal nature by claiming, before Abraham, I am, right? Islam claims Abraham. Judaism claims Abraham. But Jesus said, before Abraham, I am. This was his way of saying, I am God. His existence transcends all of time, proving that Jesus is not a creation. He is the creator stepping into our story to redeem us, to buy us back.
Let's unpack this, because there are 3 or 4 questions, which is why I wrote them down, because with my dying brains, I can't remember everything. But let's come to that first question, which has interested me because it's become a great focus recently. both in North America and Britain and in Europe. Everybody's talking about it. I thought I'd left it behind in Russia. And that's the question, who created God? And Dawkins has made it the heart of his book, The God Delusion. I was staggered when I found it there. What I mean about Russia, ladies and gentlemen, is I used to get this all the time in the Academy of Sciences when I was traveling out to Russia in the late 1980s, the early 1990s, you see, that it was almost the first question. If you believe that God created the universe, then logically you've got to ask the question, who created God? And then you have to ask, who created the God that created the God that created the God that created God? And so on ad infinitum. And that was the end of God, of course. And that's exactly what Dawkins says in The God Delusion. Well, let's analyze it for a moment. Who created God? If you ask that question, it shows you've immediately categorized God as created.
Exactly.
So you're talking about a created God.
Exactly. And that's not the same God that Christians worship. You know, when we talk about the mystery, it can sound like a cop-out, right? And oftentimes I think with us that grew up in the church, hearing that, oh, you just have to have faith, it's a mystery. And critics really will claim that this makes Christianity intellectually weak because we're not thinking for ourselves, we're just using the mystery gap. And, you know, mystery is like Wi-Fi. You might not fully understand it or even see it, or how it works, how it functions, but it powers your devices and it connects you to the internet, to the world. And just because something is a mystery, it doesn't negate the reality. Because something could be a mystery to us today, but then 100 years from now, it's no longer a mystery to us. And it reveals the limits of our human understanding. There's a saying, a God small enough to be understood is not big enough to be worshipped. And mystery is not really ignorance, but it's humility before an awesome God whose greatness is unsearchable. In fact, that mystery can draw us to worshiping God. The Trinity, for example, the incarnation, and even creation itself are mysteries. And for any scientists or atheists or agnostics to say that they're not mysteries is pretty much lying. Because to all of us, it's a mystery. None of us were there. Whether it's 10,000 years ago, 10 billion years ago, 100 billion years ago, these are all mysteries that display the infinite wisdom and power and love of God. Romans 11:33 says, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom of knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways." 2,000 years ago, mystery met revelation. The Word became flesh, and it gave us a tangible, knowable way to relate to an infinite God. Jesus is the revelation of God so that we could somehow get a glimpse of the mystery and majesty of who he is.
Now, you imagine if Richard Dawkins had written a book called The Created God's Delusion. I don't think many people would have bought it, because I don't need him to tell me that created gods are a delusion. We usually call them idols, incidentally. But you see, this question, this question is extremely interesting because it's an illustration of a question that already rules out the explanation that's most likely to be true. Because the Christian claim is that God wasn't created. So if God was uncreated, in the beginning was the Word, and I'm coming to your 3-in-1 now, and I'm bringing it in obliquely. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He already was. So the central Christian claim is, and in Judaism and Islam, of course, equally, is that God is eternal. So the question, by definition, doesn't even apply to him. That's immensely important. The only way you can get anything out of it then, in a negative sense, is to assume that everything is in the category of the created, but that's just begging the original question. And the Greeks were interested in it. And that's why John's Gospel starts with those words. In the beginning, the Word already was. And then it says, all things came to be through him. The Greeks were interested in the question of two categories: the things that came to be, the created things, and the things that already were. And the question resolves down to this: is there a thing or a being that never came to be? And that is the Christian claim, and he's called God. But there's a little codicil to this, you see. Richard Dawkins, and I had a debate with him on this very topic in Oxford. And I said to him, Richard, you say that who created God is a legitimate question. I don't think it is. But let me assume now that it is. You believe that the universe created you. So I beg leave now to ask you, using your own question, who created your creator? I'm waiting still for the answer. So that's the first point. Very briefly to the second point. God is three in one. Is it a mystery? Yes, it is. And am I allowed to tell a little story?
Yeah, although I think
brief
we
one.
should,
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to get to
moving on.
yeah.
Okay.
But do tell the story.
Yeah. I was talking to about 1,000 scientists, and a man came up to me afterwards, a physicist, and he said, that was very interesting, all that talk about God, but he said, do you know, I detect you're a Christian. And I said, you're...
Very astute gentleman.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, you're pretty sharp. And he said, come off it, he said. Now look, as a Christian, you're obliged to believe that God is a triunity, that Jesus was God and man. And he said, come on, you're a mathematician of Oxford. This is absurd. Can you explain it to me? Well, I said, can I ask you a question first? He said, sure. So I said, tell me, what is consciousness? And he thought for a second, and then he said, I don't know. I said, that's okay. Let me try an easier one. What is energy? Well, he said, I'm a physicist. I can measure energy. I could use it. I said, you know, that's not my question. What is it? He said, I don't know. Oh, I said, that's very interesting. You don't know? Tell me, I said, do you believe in consciousness? Yes, he said.
Yes.
Do you believe in energy? Yes, he said. So I said, you believe in these two things, you don't know what they are. I said, should I write you off as an intellectual? And he said, please don't. And I said, but that's exactly what you were going to do with me 5 minutes ago.
Wow, it's just, I'm listening to John Lennox. Let him tell the story. Let him tell whatever he wants to tell, because although there is a problem, in a sense, right? Mathematically, even 3 in 1, for example. How can God be 1 and 3 at the same time? And even John Lennox admits the concept is difficult to grasp. But in talking about consciousness, for example, talking about energy, talking about meaning, love, purpose, these are things that a lot of people would not be able to define, at least an objective definition of what it is or where it comes from. How are we conscious of this? Even evidence that we're conscious when the brain is not functioning, when the heart is not beating, times when people have had near-death experiences and realize that, wow, there's something beyond this natural world, beyond this physical world. And we know that's been well documented, but it's just like Jesus, right? Asking a question with a question. And you know how this might not be completely theologically accurate, but when you think of a Trinity as a dance, so to speak, you know, the dance in one essence. It's one essence, but it's 3 persons moving in perfect harmony. It's not chaos, it's communion, it's order, it's community within that Trinity. And there's that saying that I've said before, if you try to explain the Trinity, you'll lose your mind, but if you try to deny it, you'll lose your soul. Trinity is orthodoxy. And the Trinity really reflects God's relational, communal nature, right? When in Genesis 1:26, he says, let us make man in our image. We are image bearers of God. We have inherent worth because God said, let us, right? He didn't say, let me. He said, let us make man in our image. Now, it wasn't the angels making man. Now, it wasn't man making man. So what is the us? What is the plurality there? And the relational God creates relational beings, inviting us into his relational love. And just like 1 John 5:7-8 says, for there are 3 that testify, the Spirit, the water, and the blood. And the 3 are in agreement. You see, Jesus embodies the Trinity by revealing the Father, by sending the Spirit, and by reconciling us to God. That his life, his death, his resurrection show the triune God in operation, working for you, for me, for our salvation.
Don't know what energy is, and nobody does. And if you don't believe that, you physicists, read Richard Feynman. If you don't know what energy is, don't be surprised. If energy, light, gravity, and consciousness are a mystery, don't be surprised if you're going to get an element of this in God. You're bound to get it. But now I pushed him
Absolutely.
a bit further, you see. And I said, why do you believe in these things if you don't know what they are? And that was a bit difficult. So being a kind chap, I tried to help him out. And I said, you believe in these things because of their explanatory power as concepts. And he said, that's exactly right. Now I said, look, of course I can't explain to you how God became human. But I said, it's the only explanation that makes sense of the evidence as I see it. Now I said, I've got a simple analogy that might help you. It's a very low-level analogy, but at least it's biblical. I'm married. I've been married for 42 and a half years to the same person. And my wife and I are, in a sense, one. We're two persons in one flesh, the Bible would say, but in one unit. And it seems to me that at the very least, don't misunderstand me when I say this, that this mystery is telling us something magnificent about God. God is not a monolith who, to put it crudely, was lonely, so he made a few people so that he could have somebody to talk to. God is himself a fellowship. Now that's undimensioned and we can't grasp it, but there is a sense in which I feel it's got to.
You see, like what we were saying, and John Lennox could actually say that they are three. It's his wife, it's him, and it's God. In that, we know the statistics of people who pray together, who go to church together, that their chances of divorce is something like 0.01% or something like that, compared to the modern day divorce rate of over 50%. Now, when you look at Christianity versus skepticism, for example, this physicist really is hypocritical in a sense, right? Because if you're not gonna accept that you can't really explain energy or consciousness or meaning or purpose, and you can't define those, then why wouldn't you leave room for the mystery, so to speak, of something like the Trinity? Because in nature, in science, we have mysteries that we cannot explain. And so we can't merely dismiss God because of a mystery. It's like refusing to believe in gravity until you see it. We can't see gravity, we see the effects of gravity. We can't see God, but we see the effects of God. The evidence is all around through transformed lives, through answered prayers, through this communion with God, even if we can't fully explain it. Even things like suffering, which is probably the biggest question to the existence of God. You see, to an atheist, the problem of suffering is a mystery, but to the Christian, the problem of suffering is a plan. And really, skepticism can often arise from pride. And the Bible calls us to humility before God, acknowledging that his ways are always higher than our ways, and his thoughts are always higher than our thoughts. In fact, Psalm 14:1 says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." You know, Jesus invites skeptics to faith with love, with reason, with logic, with evidence. He meets doubters, even like Thomas, with grace, proving he's real and he's trustworthy. And his resurrection, evidence of his resurrection, can turn doubt into belief. And Jesus can turn every question into an opportunity for revelation. He turns our mess into a message. He turns a test into a testimony, and he can allow pain to produce and call out purpose. The mysteries of God aren't barriers, but they're bridges to deeper faith. And just as the universe has an uncaused cause, so too does every life have a purpose that starts and ends with Christ. So we can rejoice in the eternal God who knows no beginning, but offers us eternal life through Jesus. And mysteries aren't always problems to solve. They may be an invitation to worship.